Hello and welcome to the Whistling Podcast. My name is Chang Xianliang. Last time on the Whistling Podcast, I featured The Art of War by Sun Tzu. Today's podcast will be about a general of not-so-great ability who did, however, achieve a brilliant victory in Art of War style without drawing a sword. His name was Liu Kun. First, I'll give a little historical background. Liu Kun lived from 270 to June 22nd, 318 Common Era. His life overlaps the Western Jin dynasty, which ran from 266 to 316 Common Era. The Jin dynasty came after the era called the Three Kingdoms period in Chinese history, which occurred after the fall of the Han dynasty and lasted roughly from 220 to 280 Common Era. At this time, China broke into three competing kingdoms. You may know the Three Dynasties period from the multiple video games, TV shows, movies, and the book itself, which recounts this period. I'm a great fan of this book, the only one of the four great Chinese novels I've actually finished, despite my good intentions. The Jin dynasty reunited China into one kingdom after the Three Kingdoms period. The Eastern Jin came after the breakup of the Western Jin and lasted from 317 to 420 Common Era. And then it was followed by the 16 kingdoms in northern China and the Liu Song dynasty in southern China, another period of disunity. I'll be doing a podcast soon on my condensed version of the history of China, and we can put this all into context. Liu Kun was recognized as a brilliant writer as a child, and in a common tradition was a poet as well as a military commander. Only a few of Liu Kun's poems still exist today and seem to be still untranslated. China was in constant threat from so-called barbarians on all sides, but mostly at this time from the north. You may know of some of these barbarians, such as the Mongols, who eventually conquered China and a lot of the world and became the Mongol Yuan dynasty. Also were the Manchus, who conquered China and became the Qing dynasty, China's last dynasty. Another one of these constant barbarian threats were the Xiongnu. Let's talk a little bit about the art of war and how it applies to Liu Kun's eventual brilliant defeat of the Xiongnu in a particular battle. Here is a very simple summary of the art of war. 1. Knowing when to fight and when not to fight. 2. Knowing how to mislead the enemy. 3. Knowing oneself and knowing one's enemy. I have selected some relevant quotations from the Art of War that are appropriate for Liu Kun's story. From Chapter 1, Laying Plans. Verse 18.
Sun Tzu said,
All war is based on deception. Verse 24.
Sun Tzu said,
Attack him where he is unprepared. Appear where you are not expected. From Chapter 3, Attack by Stratagem. Verse 2.
Sun Tzu said,
Hence to fight and conquer in all your battles is not supreme excellence. Supreme excellence consists in breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting. Verse 6.
Sun Tzu said,
Therefore the skillful leader subdues the enemy's troops without any fighting. He captures their cities without laying siege to them. He overthrows their kingdom without lengthy operations in the field. From Chapter 4, Tactical Dispositions. Verse 2,
Sun Tzu said,
To secure ourselves against defeat lies in our own hands, but the opportunity of defeating the enemy is provided by the enemy himself. From Chapter 5, Energy. Verse 5,
孙子 said,
In all fighting, the direct method may be used for joining battle, but indirect methods will be needed in order to secure victory. Chapter 6, Weak Points and Strong. Verse 12,
Sun Tzu said,
If we do not wish to fight, we can prevent the enemy from engaging us even though the lines of our encampment be merely traced on the ground. All we need do is throw something odd and unaccountable in his way. Verse 23,
Sun Tzu said,
Rouse him and learn the principle of his activity or inactivity. Force him to reveal himself so as to find out his vulnerable spots. Chapter 7, Maneuvering. Verse 27,
孙子 said,
A whole army may be robbed of its spirit. A commander-in-chief may be robbed of his presence of mind. Verse 28,
Sun Tzu said,
Now a soldier's spirit is keenest in the morning. By noonday it has begun to flag, and in the evening his mind is bent only on returning to camp. Verse 29,
Sun Tzu said,
A clever general, therefore, avoids an army when its spirit is keen, but attacks it when it is sluggish and inclined to return. This is the art of studying moods. And so we come to Kun Liu's story and how it pertains to the Whistling Podcast. It is merely an anecdote from Liu Kun's life. It is called Lifting a Siege by Playing a Flute. This story comes from the Book of Jin, the official history of the Jin dynasty. I've tried to find an English translation of the Book of Jin, but I've had no luck. But I quote from Wikipedia, which has translated this particular incident. The story goes something like this. Liu Kun's headquarters in Jinyang was constantly besieged by the Xiongnu. In one of these sieges, Liu Kun took advantage of the moonlight to climb a tall building, where he began to whistle cleanly. This caught the attention of the invaders, who went heartsore and made long sighs because of Liu Kun's whistling. Liu Kun then began playing the nomad flute with his men. The songs that Liu Kun played reminded the barbarians of their homelands and how much they missed them. Towards dawn, Liu Kun played the flute again, this time convincing the invaders to leave and abandon the siege. And that's the end of the story. Unfortunately, Liu Kun did not come to a good end. Liu Kun was captured by a rival later in his life. He was strangled to death along with 4 of his sons and nephews. Ah well, live by the sword, die by the sword. It's very hard to find much information on the life of Liu Kun, but there is an excellently written Wikipedia article that summarizes his life. I'll leave the link in the description. So that's all I have to say about the life of Liu Kun and how whistling was used to defeat an enemy in the field. I have a few more episodes planned in my History of China and Whistling series. I'll be doing a podcast on the history of China, and I'll try to put the whole history of whistling in China into context. After that, I'll be reading the Tao Te Ching, which we'll need for an episode on transcendental whistling. I also plan on doing an episode which I call The Art of War is a Racket, combining The Art of War by Sun Tzu and War is a Racket by Smedley Butler. And unless something interesting comes up, that will be the end of my series on whistling in China.
Call action.
A call to action.
Call action.
Call to action.
A call to action.
A call to action. A call to action.
You can join the Whistling Podcast group on Facebook. I now have a website, thewhistlingpodcast.com. You can support the show on Patreon at patreon.com/The Whistling Podcast. And I also have a Quora site for discussions, the Whistling Podcast space.quora.com. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time on the Whistling Podcast.